I thought that I would be free when I reached 18, but I was wrong. My father got sick, and as the only daughter, it became my duty not only to help cover my father's medical bill but also to feed our family of 3. My mother also did her best to find odd jobs, but they were few and with a long lull in between. And with the medical bill mounting, I decided to help out. My father's company medical insurance did not cover it since the sickness was not work-related. Needless to say, I suddenly became a breadwinner. That's when I saw an advertisement on Craigslist for a babysitting job for a 2-year-old baby girl. I immediately applied for it. I had experienced babysitting during my younger years. My mom always volunteered me to babysit. It was an easy way to get some extra money. There was a generous family who paid me extra and rounded off the hours. There was one who even drove me home. On the other hand, there were unpleasant but forgettable experiences as well. But those experiences fail in comparison with my terrifying experience. We have all heard horror stories about babysitting. I have my own story to share. I want to warn others not to ignore some red flags in babysitting. My experience scarred me for life. I can still remember those dreadful days. Maybe the worst days of my life. My name is Samantha. I am young, vivacious, and brimming with love and life. Why wouldn't I want to babysit for some additional money when I am cool and kids adore me? But I had no idea that watching a toddler would put me in a demon's lair. I was in my usual routine of surfing the net when I found an advertisement on Craigslist for a babysitting job. I told myself that this was a good find since it was just next to the town I lived in. I called the number and spoke to a woman named Sarah. I introduced myself and my reason for the call. She confirmed that they were indeed looking for a babysitter for their 2-year-old daughter. She mentioned that she leaves the house for work, and her husband stays home and is mostly busy with his online business. They needed someone to take care of the baby from the time she leaves for work in the morning until she arrives home in the evening. She gave the phone to her husband. He asked me a lot of questions, which included my past experiences in babysitting. I responded with my skills in how I handled difficult kids. I was relieved that I had been accepted for the job. There were some personal questions that he asked though.
One last question. Do you have a boyfriend? Or are you sexually active? I just want to make sure you won't let anybody, especially your boyfriend, enter our house. This is how the last babysitter got fired.
Oh, please don't worry. I don't have any boyfriend.
Great. Then I guess you can start as soon as you can.
I realized that the statement wasn't a question. In retrospect, I see it was a red flag I disregarded because I needed the money. He offered me $30 per hour, which was a decent amount. My mother was grateful that I could buy my father's medicine. She had been a housewife for years, so she relied on me being the only child working for them. The residence was located in a suburban area. The house had high ceilings, typical of southern houses before the days of air conditioning, so the heat could rise. It had a porch around it, and on one side were rooms that had windows, just like typical American houses, which are made of wood. I would say that the family belongs to a pretty average middle-income house and neighborhood. I knocked on the door, but I did not hear a response. I saw the doorbell and rang it, then I glanced at the window. I overheard a voice telling me to enter and wait. It appeared that the man who answered was busy. I grabbed the doorknob and twisted it. I pushed the door and I saw a baby girl sitting on a carpeted floor playing by herself. The toddler seemed normal, just like any other 2-year-old girl. I entered the house. I noticed the not well-polished wood flooring and a steep staircase that curved upward toward a lofty gallery on the second floor. The cluttered dining table and kitchen were located next to the living room. After a few minutes, her father went out of his room. He took off his eyeglasses and looked at me.
Sorry, I couldn't open the door for you. I was busy with my computer. My name is Brian. It's a pleasure to meet you.
That's no problem. Nice to meet you too.
I could smell the smoke from his cigarette. He said that he was busy with his computer in his room. His name is Brian, and he is in his 50s. He was bald in the middle of his head. He had sides of gray hair. His eyes appear sunken and puffy. I noticed that the child's demeanor changed when he entered. It's like she was tense and was deathly afraid of him. I was confused by this, but since I was excited to earn some cash for my father, I did not pay much attention to it. I then started my job by taking the baby into my arms. I was surprised that she embraced me as if she was afraid of something. I also noticed some creepy glances that the father gave me. I was reading a children's book to the baby when her mother arrived before lunch. She greeted me and kissed her baby. She also went to her husband's room but went out right away when she saw that he was busy surfing the net. My first impression of her was that she was a very nice woman. She went home to prepare for a business trip that weekend. She prepared lunch while giving me instructions about my task. Then her husband got out of his room and we had our lunch. They seemed pretty passionate about each other. I was 10 minutes late coming to their house the next morning due to the traffic. When I got in front of their door, I overheard that the baby was crying. Brian rudely told me to
Can you come on time and prepare some milk for the baby, for Christ's sakes?
His tone hardened as he continued to speak. His voice picked up an angry tone. Brian went to the baby's room. He left the door open so I could see what he was doing inside the room. He grabbed the baby's face in anger and jerked it until the baby stopped crying in fear. Her shrill cries soon became muffled, and the infant soon started to wriggle and kick. Later, her tiny body became entirely limp. I panicked and pushed the door, ran inside, and picked up the half-conscious baby.
Excuse me, sir. You can't do that to your daughter. I will call the police if you do that again.
I could see from his face that he was caught off guard by my reaction. I was so relieved that the baby came around and everything seemed fine. Soon, she fell asleep, and I put her in her cot. When Brian left the room, he did not even check on the well-being of his daughter. It's as if he doesn't care. When I left the room, I saw him in the living room watching Netflix. His wife left early for a business trip. She had already told me last night to stay away from her husband, who is introverted and prefers to stay alone. So I went back to the baby's room and played with her when she woke up. Brian soon knocked on the door and shouted,
It's time for the baby to take a bath.
I noticed that he was unusually rude to me that day. He verbally abused me for tiny details I did wrong in babysitting. He also watched how I bathed his baby in the bathroom. I told myself that he was looking after the welfare of his baby. However, his presence made me uncomfortable. I was not sure if he was looking after his baby or if he was inappropriately watching me. I said that because I noticed that his glances at me were usually long and dragged for a long time. Later that day, I also noticed that he was watching a rated 18 film in the living room. The TV volume was loud. I saw some scenes and I knew that he was watching 50 Shades of Grey. He would check on the baby and enter the room from time to time without knocking at the door. He would shout for any reason I didn't know. He would enter the toilet several times after berating me, and he would come out sweating and would give me more eerie stares. He ordered me to prepare lunch while the baby was sleeping. I cooked some tortilla soup and tossed some vegetable salad. Brian was keeping an eye on me all that time, which made me even more uncomfortable. When I served him the food, he asked me to have lunch with him. I declined, but he was insistent. I sat down and ate with him at the dining table. He tasted the soup and told me that I cooked better than his wife. He then proceeded to eat the meal I prepared. He complimented me each time he took a bite. He told me that my potential boyfriend is going to be lucky since I know the way to a man's heart.
So, I remember, during the interview, you said you don't have any boyfriend, right? Are you picky in terms of choosing men? Most women nowadays prefer older men.
Luckily, the baby cried, so I excused myself and quickly went to her room.
Excuse me, I have to check on your baby.
I felt a weird vibe when I saw him staring at me and grinning before I closed the baby's room. I heard that Brian locked the main entrance. The main door had a double lock on it. Then he maxed out the volume of the TV, which was playing another movie. He came to the baby's room with a glass of lemon juice, which he told me to drink.
I made some lemonade for you. You should drink it.
The man who was bad-mouthing me earlier became nice and offered me a lemonade. He was smiling and occasionally biting his lips. I told myself that I wouldn't drink it, since I was carrying the baby and letting her sleep. I thanked him for the juice and told him I would drink it later.
Thank you so much. I will drink it later.
He came near the baby and caressed her hair. His gaze at the baby turned to my chest. His hand touched my waist, so I stepped backward. He apologized and said that he didn't mean to touch me. He took the baby from me, and I noticed how his arms touched my body.
I would leave the house if you wouldn't stop harassing me.
Oh, come on. I wasn't harassing you. I was just asking you to drink the lemonade.
I had a hint that the juice may have some sleeping pills in it. I told myself that this man had a bad plan for me. My mind immediately focused on preserving myself by stopping him from his advances. Things escalated into full-blown harassment. He put down the baby. He took the glass of juice and forced me to drink it.
I said drink it, you bitch! Open your mouth!
I took it and spilled it on his face and ran to the main door. But before I could reach it, Brian overtook me and pulled my hand towards him. I felt a sharp pain in my wrist. I tried to slap him with my free hand, but he easily caught it. He then pulled me even closer to the point that my face was on his chest.
Please stop! You're hurting me!
Brian was laughing loudly and mocking me. The baby suddenly woke up from the commotion and started crying as well. I was hoping that this would alert the neighbors, and they would at least check on us, if not call the police. My whole body was shaking, and I was slowly losing my strength. Every time I moved to set myself free from Brian's grasp, it made him tighten his hold on me. I tried to cry for help to get the neighbors to intervene. Brian let one of my hands go and placed his hand on my lips. He jerked my head in the process. This confused me even more. But with one of my arms loose, I slapped him on the ear as hard as I could. I saw some blood flowing on the outer part of his ear. He grimaced in pain and eventually loosened his grip on my other arm. I took the opportunity to run towards the door, but he was able to grab my hair, which stopped me in my tracks. All of this happened so fast that I did not even think at all. I was just reacting to what he was doing. I saw him looking at the hammer on top of the dining table. He must have put it there because I didn't notice it earlier. From that point, I realized that I was already fighting for my life. When I couldn't remove his hands from my hair, I kicked him in his crotch several times. He immediately removed his grip on my hair and placed both hands on his crotch while grimacing in pain. I bolted away from the house and never looked back. I could hear the baby crying and I was afraid that he'd hurt the child, but I was too scared to go back. It was so traumatic that every man I encountered outside after that looked like him. In my mind, I could still see his face smiling and biting his lips while approaching me. My wrist seemed to be dislocated. I saw some discoloration in my arms and some bruises. I recalled that Brian had pulled my arms too hard. I went home crying, so my mother asked me why. I did not tell her what happened because I did not want her to worry about me. In hindsight, I should have called the police, but I was still young back then, and I was more concerned that my reputation would be tarnished if my future employers knew that I called the police on my previous employer. I decided to call Sarah and tell her everything because I was concerned about their daughter. She was silent the whole time. I could tell that that was not the first time that it had happened to them. She promised that she would pay my salary for that week if I didn't call the police. I know it's foolish, but I wasn't thinking right back then, so I told her that I'd think about it. I turned on my laptop and pulled up a browser. I googled Brian's full name and was surprised to find out that he was a registered sex offender who was just recently out of a 20-year jail sentence. My mother saw my bruises, so she forced me to tell the truth and called the police to file a complaint. Brian was arrested, but when I was invited to the precinct to file a formal complaint, I dropped the charges. The mere sight of him gave me some chills. His wife also called me and pleaded with me to drop the charges once more. She offered me a huge amount of money that we needed to settle the remaining medical bills for my father. Needless to say, I accepted the offer because my father needed it for his treatment. I vowed never to babysit again. I was too traumatized by what happened. Luckily, I found a new job as a service crew at McDonald's.